Muy buenos días con todos, bienvenidos y
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar organized by the FAO-WHO Coordinating Committee for Latin America and the Caribbean, known as CCLAC, and we do regional international coordination celebrating World Food Safety Day 2021 with people from the agro-food chain throughout the region who will share their knowledge and experience. We welcome everyone. We are going to say hello to our panelists, Romel Betancourt, who is the chair of the Coordinating Committee FAO-WHO for Latin America and the Caribbean, CCLAC, Marisa Caipa, who comes from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, and Lorena Medina, who comes from the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture, IICA, as well as Margarita Corrales from the Pan American Health Organization, and Ms. Guerra, who's the director of the International Organization for Agriculture and Livestock Health, OIRSA. We will now turn the floor over to Ms. Romel Betancourt, who's the chair of the Coordinating Committee, FAO-WHO for Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you so much. I want to say hello to everyone from Quito, Ecuador, in the middle of the world. I want to send a warm thank you to the and everybody here present with us today. To our attendees in this event, both on our continent and from outside of our continent, to the translation team, and to everybody who has joined us in celebrating this day, World Food Safety Day. On behalf of the region and CCLAC, we want to underscore the importance of this day and invite all of you to reflect on why June 7th was declared by the UN as a specific day set aside to reflect on food safety and its importance. This is an initiative from the region, from Costa Rica, which worked very hard as a representative of our region to set aside a day for us to talk about this theme. Let's remember that without food safety, there is no food security. Food safety is so important and transcends all productive processes for food, and it also transcends borders. It is going to shape safety for the consumer, and it is going to make it possible for food to be distributed nationally or internationally in an equitable way. Consumers need to be able to trust that when they're eating food, that food is safe and that they won't get sick. That's what we're going to be talking about on these days, on June 1st and June 3rd. And we've invited lots of different guests and experts from throughout the region to talk about this topic. We just want to remind you as I wrap up my remarks that if it is not safe, it isn't food. That will make it a risk factor for anybody who eats it if it isn't safe. Thank you so much and welcome everyone to this day. Thank you to Rommel. We will now turn the floor over to Marisa Caipo from the UNFAO Food and Agriculture Organization. The floor is yours. Thank you so much. Good morning, colleagues. Food safety for everyone. I want to join the remarks of Dr. Betancourt, and I want to add that we have these 2 days of the event set aside to reflect and share our experiences in safety in different countries throughout the region. And I will now turn the floor back over to Jose. Thank you, Marisa. We are going to continue with Ana Marisa Cordero, who's coordinating the Agriculture and Livestock Program for IICA. Thank you so much. Hi to everyone. I hope you're all doing well. A special greeting to our colleagues here with us today at the opening panel. And congratulations to everyone for the effort put into this event. As we kick off this week for food safety, we are thinking about the challenges that we have faced over this past year. We are facing new opportunities, we are facing new ways to do things, and we are seeing how important it has been to work on developing new strategies that promote transformation and improve the way food safety systems operate in all of our countries, with the ultimate goal, as we've already heard from my colleagues, to protect public health and to meet the needs of our consumers, our trading partners, and also to provide support to the private sector. We must think about strategies that revolve around food, such as creating a food safety culture that is cross-cutting, that is comprehensive, where safety is a shared responsibility for everyone, whether you're from the public sector or the private sector. It has to be a joint effort. We have to work on strengthening our national food oversight systems, and we also have to support public-private partnerships in order to truly foster safe food production. And to some degree or another, we need to be able to achieve that ultimate objective, which is to encourage consumer health and promote the creation of a food safety culture up and down the entire food chain. I congratulate everyone for the shared effort in organizing this event, all of the different agencies and bodies that strive to support a food safety culture in our countries. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ana Marisa, and we will now ask Margarita Corrales from the Pan American Health Organization and from the Pan American Fever Center, PANAFTOSA, to join us. Thank you so much. I want to say hello to everyone who is here with us on World Food Safety Day 2021. This year, our goal is to support safe food today for a healthy tomorrow. We want to underscore not only the importance of good practices up and down the entire production chain, but also think about sustainable production and consumption. We've seen that there is a larger population than ever on the planet to feed, and we are going to need intensive production that is going to use land and that is impacting climate change. We have to be aware, not only in the political sector and in the public and private and academic world about how to achieve more sustainable production, but we also have to think about a change in consumer habits. What we're seeing, thanks to this pandemic, because we've learned quite a few lessons from this COVID-19 pandemic, what we're seeing is that consumers are increasingly concerned about healthy living, a healthy diet, and having safe food that is going to help their health. We're seeing increasingly demanding consumers who want to understand the agriculture and livestock practices behind their food and make sure that those are sustainable up and down the chain. And they're thinking about traceability systems. They want them to be more transparent, not only to track the origin of food and how it's produced, but also to understand the content of the food they eat. And that is related to labeling policies. This is a day also for our professionals in food safety and food health to support all of the work done by people in this sector, all of the people behind each food reaching a consumer, making sure that that food is safe and healthy. I hope you all learned something today and that you take home some messages back to your homes and that you learn something about consumption and food. And thank you to everyone for being here. We're available to you. Thank you, Margarita. To close this first part of the opening remarks, we're inviting Efraín Guerra from OIRSA. I want to greet my colleague Romel Betancourt from the Coordinating Committee, WHO, FAO for Latin America and the Caribbean, and to all the distinguished guests from the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, as well as our friends from the Pan American Health Organization and the Inter-American Institute of Cooperation for Agriculture. Good morning to everyone. I also want to offer my greetings and a warm welcome to everybody who has logged into this webinar through whatever system. We are commemorating something very important, the first steps along a pathway that began in 2019. It's a 3-year pathway and went through 2020 and 2021. It's something that's now consolidated the International World Food Safety Day. In a time of a pandemic, this day is especially important, but the concern for keeping a solid immune system for people in order to resist this global pandemic, which is still going on, has always been important. The pandemic is still causing harm to human health. Having food that is safe is going to help us upkeep our immune systems. If we think about the entire food production chain, from the field, if we think about the rational use of agrochemicals and insecticides, or medical products, or veterinary
Comprobado que en la larga
products,
pueden algunos de ellos tener efectos tóxicos a partir de ciertos niveles en la salud.
It has been demonstrated that in the long term, there can be impacts on human health. Some practices are essential, but when we think about transportation and storage, and we think about some basic grains, there can be a significant impact on human health. Or if we think about the way that food is processed and stored, sometimes there can be harm in physical and chemical and biological contamination. If we think about zoonosis and other diseases, as well as salmonella and other fevers, if we think about encephalomyelitis, if we think about avian bird flu, food safety must be rigorous. And that is why we are inviting everyone from whatever organization you come from, regional and global, to be involved in this topic to contribute their full effort. Congratulations to everyone. We offer our thanks to everyone who has contributed on a daily basis to help achieve Safe food now for a healthy tomorrow. Thank you so much. Thank you, Efrain. And we will now invite you to watch a short video.
Soy Irene Cortés y comparto mi experiencia desde Costa Rica. La importancia de producir alimentos libres de sustancias de plaguicidas y microorganismos es la garantía de una población sana. De ahí la importancia de conocer cómo y quién produce nuestros alimentos. Hoy hacemos un gran esfuerzo para producir alimentos inocuos, para garantizar la salud de mi familia y los consumidores. Dentro de los elementos que utilizamos para mejorar la inocuidad de los alimentos, y en este caso la producción de chile, es la implementación del manejo integrado de plagas, dentro de los cuales ha sido un elemento que ha quedado rezagado actualmente en la agricultura. También utilizamos semilla vegetal certificada, realizamos lo que es la identificación de hongos, bacterias y plagas en general para tener la mejor estrategia de control. Posteriormente clasificamos el bioinsumo a utilizar y como última herramienta seleccionamos el bioquímico que en caso se amerite lo aplicamos. Pero cuando se aplica la parte de manejo químico, nos enfocamos mucho en lo que es la dosificación, la calibración del equipo y más que todo lo que es el lapso o el periodo que hay desde la aplicación a la cosecha. Con todo esto garantizamos una inocuidad más acertada y más sana para el consumidor.
Muy bien, vamos a iniciar con las temáticas de esta mañana.
We will now go into the thematic speeches with Roberto Morta from Guatemala.
Buenos días, parece que hay un error en la agenda, no es Roberto Mota, es Raúl Peralta.
I am not Roberto Morta, I'm actually Raúl Peralta. I think there is a mistake on the schedule.
Bueno, el tema que vamos a exponerle en esta mañana.
Anyways, the topic we are going to be talking about this morning is about good agricultural practices with a risk-based approach. And this is work that we've done at the OIRSA for OIRSA countries. First, I want to explain to you what the OIRSA is. It's the International Regional Agriculture and Livestock Health Body, which was founded in 1953. And this is a body that is specialized in the areas of animal health, plant health, quarantine services, and food safety. And we have 9 countries. We are working with Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, and the Dominican Republic. Those are the countries that belong to the OIRSA. But first, I want to talk about an introduction to good farming practices or good agricultural practices. There's a lot of different sources of information. The reason that we address this topic is because there was a call this year in World Food Safety Day, which is to have healthy food today for a healthy tomorrow. And there's 5 pillars of that, and one of them is to guarantee food safety, which is basically a call for authorities. The second is to have safe food and keep food safe throughout the entire chain, and that's a call to the productive sector. The 5th is a call to consumers, for consumers to stay up to date and informed. And the 4th, which I left for last on purpose, The fourth is a call to all of the different stakeholders in the chain. That can be the government, it can be farmers, producers, and consumers to guarantee food safety. So when we talk about good practices, what does that look like? Good practices make sure that food is safe and appropriate for the purpose to which it is allocated. And good practices can include avoiding the usage of zones where the environment could be a threat to food safety. Another point is to control pollutants or contaminants, which could be in the environment, such as heavy metals or bacteria. And we also have to control pests and diseases in animals and plants to make sure that they do not entail a threat to food safety. Another topic is to adopt practices and measures that make it possible to guarantee food production in appropriate hygienic conditions. So that means when we're doing production, then we have to make sure we are not contaminating the food. All of that is designed to reduce the likelihood that a hazard could arise that could jeopardize food safety for consumption and during any subsequent stage in the chain.
As to the standardized guideline for risk-based agricultural best practices, how it was created? First, OIRSA has a 2-year operational plans. In 2020, 2021, we have the standardization of standards and production of guidelines. And we have an activity which is an harmonized or standardized guideline. And the operational plans of the various regional directors of OIRSA are approved by, in our case, by all 9 directors of food safety from the 9 countries of the membership. So the goal of this guideline based on risk is creating a standardized guideline based on risk for its implementation by the productive sector and as a reference in the agricultural productive system inspection in all 9 countries. But not only that, this could be useful for other countries outside OIRSA who actually participated. All 9 offices in food safety in the OIRSA membership: Mexico, CCLAC, by Belize, PAHO, Guatemala, Vizarmaga, El Salvador, DGSV, the Ministry of Agriculture, Honduras, the SENASA, Nicaragua, IPSA, Costa Rica, SFE, Panama, it's MIDA, and Dominican Republic, DIA, from the Ministry of Agriculture. How this guideline was actually structured. The mandate of the technical roundtable, we produced terms of reference for hiring a consultant responsible for producing, for drafting these guidelines. This draft was standardized by the all 9 directors, and we collected information from the regulations in best practices in the region. With these inputs, the consultant submitted the first draft of contents of this guideline, which again were standardized by the all 9 directors, and a body of work was established so that as we were making progress, everything was standardized. Then the first draft, which was standardized by all 9 countries, there was a second release and a third release, that is nearly all 5 steps of a standard in a fast track. The guideline is in the final editing process, so that we can have it ready on the 7th, next Monday, the World Food Safety Day. This is an introduction, 12 chapters, and 2 addenda. Addenda 1 It's a best practice inspection criteria, and addenda 2, sampling procedures for pesticides and biological hazards inspection. What are the content in compliance with the regulations of OIRSA membership and the international reference regulations? In this best practice guideline, this is the most updated and standardized guideline today. Each chapter includes, this is new, each chapter includes the safety risk associated to production of food and vegetables in support of the production sector. There is a guideline assessing the risk and hazards that may be present in those stages. We have an identification and classification of potential risks and sets the preventive actions and or corrective actions suggested to producers. In one single document, we cover producers and inspection criteria for the official regulator and any other agency that may be willing to use these guidelines for inspection or certification purposes. There is a clear description of factors to be considered in the application of best practices in each productive activity. It is we also considered at all development levels, that is, big companies and small businesses or small producers. And there is a reference made to the consultation sources and the application of specific regulations. It also describes the components and recommendations in the preparation. This is also something new, describing the components and recommendations in the preparation of a safety plan for agricultural production units and pictures of best practices from all 9 countries. We have 313 pages. That's a fairly thick guideline, so to speak. Addenda 1, inspection procedure. Here are the control points and suggested compliance criteria for the verification of safety management systems in applying best practices in primary production units for fruits and vegetables. This is also applicable to other areas of fruit and vegetables, which are the high risk products, but this may be applied for any other crop. Addenda 1 has 100 and that's a checklist of 106 items, which we also recommend the verification of these items. Visual inspection, if it's an activity, signage, document to be submitted, a risk assessment to be conducted, a procedure to be verified, if it's a record, a plan, or an interview. Addenda 2 sets out the sampling procedure for the pesticide trace analysis and biological hazards in fresh produce. In summary, these guidelines will be available as of the 7th of July for all 9 countries in the OIRSA and for anyone who would like to use this guideline. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Raul. Remember that you can always ask questions using the comments. And these questions will be answered at the end of our meeting. Remember, you can ask questions. That's no problem. Also, for the panel members, please, if you could try to speak a bit slower because we have simultaneous interpreting. Thank you very much for that. Well, let's go ahead now from Paraguay, Marcos Medina. Marcos, you're recognized.
Aishapa Maiteirori, con este saludo en idioma guaraní.
In Guarani, let me greet you, all of you. Thank you for the honor of sharing this webinar in such a significant day for our countries, for all those that we are in the production of food. Thank you for the invitation. Let me briefly share with you the experience of Paraguay in the last 20 years, especially in the uh, meat production. This is an industry that has growth aiming at the food safety and food security, uh, an effort that has been extremely successful. Paraguay is a country which is divided into two. Paraguay River cuts the country into two. The east region has the size of Nicaragua. In this region, we have the 97% of our population, 99% of agriculture is a business and family in this area. And it's livestock production based on grains. The other region is the western region, El Chaco, with that's the size of Ecuador, less than 3% of the population of the country, 200,000 people, not more than that, and that's uh, natural grazed based on livestock production and agriculture. Paraguay has a huge exporting, export oriented. We are number one exporter in electricity. We're also important in the organic sugar, mandioca, stevia. We have the third largest river barges fleet after China and the US. We're exporting mat herb, soy, starch, soy oil, chia, corn, beef. But with a population of around 7 million people, we are producing food for over 80 million people around the world. The GDP structure, uh, 45% of our GDP comes from agriculture and livestock. 62% comes from agri-food products, even though we have this trend to industrialize our production. Export of commodities is still very significant in our economy. This is the geo-reference distribution of the use of land. 41% of our territories is livestock, 13% is agriculture, 5% other uses, and 41% of our surface is still native forest. And, uh, and this is around the surface area of Switzerland, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Slovenia together. Now, briefly, let me share with you the experience with natural Paraguay beef. You, in the last 20 years, the stocks have grown by 45%, slaughtering multiplied by four, and the tonnage of exported beef grew by four times. The value of export grew by a 20% factor, in, mainly when considering the value of exports. This is the trend in the increase of the bovine stock starting 2002. We have had a significant increase, and 2014 we have around 14 million heads. This is the evolution of our exports in tons, in the carcass tons. As you can see, the growing trend where we have gone from 97,000 tons of exports up to 380,000 tons in 2021. The peak was in 2014, 389,000 tons. Same trend is true for the added value exports, where via a big growth in the last 20 years. This is a comparison with Mercosur countries in between 2000 and 2020. Well, Paraguay grew exports by 20 times. Brazil did at 5.5 times, Uruguay 4.1 times, and Argentina 4.6 times. So the country, Paraguay, has had significant growth in the value of exports in this context. At present, we are the ninth world exporters, and this has been during the last 20 years. This process is significant from the social dimension. As you can see in this chart, the increase of export has a is an active correlation with a decrease in poverty. As the higher the exports, the lower the poverty or extreme poverty. This is more than significant because at the end of the day, what we want is a sustainable development. End users, the citizens, have to receive and enjoy the benefits. And in the last 20 years, just to give you another fact, the middle class have gone from 20% of the population in 2000 to up to 44% of the population in 2020. Of course, this is quite significant. The Another important piece of information is the production of greenhouse effect gases, where we see in Paraguay throughout the context of production or emissions accounts for 0.1% of the total emissions in the planet for greenhouse effect gases without taking into account sequestration. And we are placing another emphasis, and we are working in several places. We're conducting research work, and we are almost sure that our livestock is neutral. It's Our livestock production is it's capturing more than the emissions, and that's the interest of global consumers. Again, to put this into perspective, everything we produce in a year in terms of greenhouse effect gases is the same as the production of Washington, D.C., or 60% of Rome in Italy. That is, again, we are a food producer, a safe food producer, but with a minimum carbon footprint in terms of production, or maybe neutral. It is also important to say that this growth is because we have stable policies allowing the private sector to invest, and the Guarani, our national currency, is the oldest in South America, 72 years in place without changing a single zero. That is, in Paraguay, you will see we talked about millions, in millions of guaranis, and million guaranis is about 120, 130 dollars, US dollars, and that's because the currency is very stable. We have debt 2 to 1 ratio in terms of foreign debt. A very important macroeconomic stability. Inflation is less than 5%. Predictable public policies, free flow of capital and dividends. All that has allowed growth. And of course, certain comparative advantages of the country, such as low tax levels, excellent tax incentives, the lowest value added tax in the region, no tariffs for exports, open economy, low comparative cost, young labor, good quality raw materials and predictable public policies. Within this context, Paraguay has the mission or the ambition to produce 100,000 to 600,000 tons of exports. That's a commitment we have undertaken as a value chain, both of public and private sector. Among the main public policies for livestock is animal health. It's a state policy, it's a public good, which has been worked throughout the various levels in the last 20 years. We've recently added this series of success factors or successful policies. We have appointed Widi Oyaga as the chairperson of the board of the Animal World Health Organization, which is a significant achievement of these public policies. Although we have had some challenges, but we have been able to face them. And of course, this effort has been recognized by appointing our chairman of the Animal World Health Organization. We produce natural beef, open with no hormones and no antibiotics, with high standards of animal safe and of course we're working on the access to premium and niche markets.
I don't want to go on for too much longer, but I want to share this with you. There are some areas that we share in all of our different action sectors. There are opportunities common to our entire continent of Latin America. We are rich in natural resources, rich in human talent. We are the cornucopia of the world. We are the farm of the world. And so feeding the world is an opportunity, but above all, it is a major commitment and a major responsibility that we have toward humanity at a point in time in which we need food more than ever to help the history of our world. Thank you so much. And I'm open to any questions that you might have. Thank you to Marcos. We are now going to watch another video about food pollutants. Let's roll the video.
Hola a todos, mi nombre es Cristina Briones. Trabajo en el Laboratorio de Ensayos Biológicos de la Universidad de Costa Rica y soy miembro de uno de los comités CODEX en Costa Rica. Uno de los principales aportes que realiza el Laboratorio de Ensayos Biológicos para la inocuidad de los alimentos es con la realización de pruebas de carácter toxicológico, las cuales son muy importantes en la evaluación del riesgo de múltiples sustancias. Si consideramos la inocuidad como una característica que tiene un alimento de no causar daño a la salud de las personas que lo consumen, esta, sin lugar a dudas, es una pieza fundamental para
undoubtedly it is a cornerstone.
Un alimento, por más nutritivo que sea, no cumplirá su propósito si no se encuentra libre de contaminación física, química o microbiológica. Desde esta perspectiva, la inocuidad alimentaria es de suma importancia para garantizar la nutrición y salud de las personas y de esta manera mantener una sociedad saludable que pueda afrontar un ambiente cada vez más difícil debido a la proliferación de enfermedades y cambios ambientales y que seguramente continuarán incrementándose. Para fortalecer la inocuidad existen varios elementos en los que se pueden trabajar y actividades en nuestros propios hogares. Uno de especial importancia es el de desarrollar sistemas de diagnóstico cada vez más eficientes que nos den
We are
información.
facing increasingly difficult challenges to find the source of pollutants, which are proliferating rapidly, and we must take action in a timely manner to address them. At our research center at the university, we are researching about the presence of contaminants in diverse sources of food, and we alert the authorities when we find results in our studies, and we come up with proposals for food safety, and we come up with processes for food safety, always in conjunction with our students who are able to see how improved food safety can help the country as a whole.
Muy bien, pues vamos a continuar con las
We will
temáticas.
now continue with our themed talks. We're going to hear about food contaminants. We are going to be hearing from Mr. Ramel Betancourt from Ecuador. The floor is yours. Thank you so much. We are going to be talking this morning about contaminants of food when it comes to primary production. I hope you can all see my screen. Yes, it seems that we can. So I was asked to talk about contaminants, and I've decided to focus on primary foods because the food supply chain is very big and very complex. So I'm going to offer a brief reflection about concerns that consumers have. We're often asked by consumers, we're often receiving inquiries, what can I eat? What should I eat? At so many events, we've heard about news, and sometimes we think to ourselves, okay, we're going to eat this food, but we're a little bit afraid that we might get sick. And that's a sign that something is happening in the safety system. When we think about, oh, could this piece of meat have hormones? Maybe I should order something vegetarian, but could my lettuce have pesticides, or is it organic? We have to think about the bio inputs. Are we going to be eating some type of bacteria? Or what about the water? We've heard about safety events happening through water. So as consumers, we're increasingly facing a situation where there are times when we ask ourselves, what can I eat to not get sick? As I said a couple of seconds ago, the food chain is very long. It goes from primary production, from those first steps in the field, and it goes all the way up to the table of the consumer, where we are, where we sit. And we heard this in the opening remarks from Margarita, that we all have a shared responsibility across the food chain. Every stakeholder has to help preserve the integrity of our food. So as we said, we're going to talk about a couple of basic concepts, contaminants in primary production. As I said, the chain is very long, it's very big, and an issue can happen at any point along the chain. So what is a contaminant? A lot of people might ask themselves, what is a contaminant? Or consumers might ask if they're new to this world, if they're new to food safety. Contaminants are agents that are present in the body or an object or in the food that are able to cause a disease in a person or cause illness in a person when somebody ingests that contaminant. And that's why we say if a piece of food or product is contaminated, then it no longer is a piece of food. It becomes a risk factor. Then what is risk? Well, what are we talking about? The risk of getting sick, of ingesting a contaminated piece of food. It's the probability of a harmful effect to health or the severity of the effect. And of course, that could range from just a light gastroenteritis even all the way to death, as we're going to see. and it is the consequence of a hazard in food. So what is a hazard? What is the danger? Well, now we have a deeper concept. A danger is a biological, a chemical, or a physical agent found in food that can cause an effect that is adverse to human health. Sorry, the slides are kind of running faster than I wanted, but I don't know why that's happening. We'll keep going.
Hemos hablado de los agentes.
So we've spoken about the agents, the risks. Now we're going to talk about contamination. What types of contamination might we face that could turn a piece of food into a contaminated piece of food? We have direct and we have cross. And direct contamination is when the contaminants get into the food via a person who is handling the food incorrectly, when somebody is not respecting biosafety measures, or when the surface where the food is being handled or packaged or wrapped is contaminated itself, and that's a direct contamination. Now, cross-contamination could be understood as the movement of a present danger from one food to another, from one surface to another, from one vehicle to another, or the surface of a vehicle that might not be clean enough or might not be disinfected enough to ensure food safety. So you should remember, we've spoken about different types of food hazards, biological, chemical, and physical. We've got biological, we've got bacteria, we've got virus, we've got parasites. On the chemical category, we could have residue or waste from veterinary medications used for ag and livestock. We've got pesticides used for farming, we've got heavy metals, and then of course we've got the physical category, which could be waste or pieces, shards of stone or wood or glass. Those can also be considered contaminants. And when we're managing food safety, we tend to focus especially on the first two categories, on biological and chemical, because they're not visible to the naked eye easily, and we have to have some ability to analyze them in order to detect them, and as a result of detecting them, figure out if that food is still okay or not. So we have physical mechanisms that we can use to separate out the food that's contaminated.
Estos alimentos, como decíamos entonces, pueden causarnos enfermedad.
So we could face disease as a result of these contaminants. So I've got some overall global figures about what could be happening. So what could be happening? We've got a foodborne illness, which is called an ETA in Spanish, and we're seeing that 1 in 10 people around the world, this is according to the World Health Organization, can suffer from a foodborne illness. 10% is really severe. Think about 1 in 10 people. And that could be 600 million people every year. And if, I'm sorry that I'm using this comparison, but think about the effects of a disease like this, or think about the effects of the virus. We could think about 400 million people dying from this type of thing or getting sick from this type of thing. And if we translate that into loss of productivity, especially for less developed nations, there could be figures of as much as $95,000 a year. And I don't want to get too stuck on numbers, but the challenges are really big. So if we think about the future of food safety, if we think about the challenges, we saw a couple of years ago that there was a conference organized by the FAO and the WHO. It was the first World Conference for Food Safety back in 2019, and we spoke about food systems, safe food systems, about sustainability and the effects of climate change, which is accelerating and to some degree or another is having a really big influence on food safety. And then we spoke about the role of us as consumers, so that we can be the driver of change, so that we can choose and opt for healthy, safe products, and in that way support healthier and safer food systems and make them more sustainable. There's a third pillar, which is science and innovation and technology and transformation in the digital world. We're seeing that digital services are increasingly going to be found in food safety. And we're also seeing that the burden of foodborne illnesses is increasing, and we can see the importance of investing in food safety, not only to protect the health of consumers, but also because it can alleviate the burden on public health systems, which right now are totally collapsed. Imagine that on top of what's going on right now, if there was a food safety outbreak, it could be disastrous. And so we have to, of course, keep trade flows open, both nationally and internationally. So now we are getting much deeper into this topic when we're seeing that science must help us understand the groundwork for decision making so that we can manage food safety and we can manage the risks in food, as we said just a couple of minutes ago, in the productive chain, wherever it falls in the food chain. Another important topic is what we heard from another colleague. We heard from Raul in his speech and from Efrain in his opening remarks and from Margarita, how important it is to have risk mitigation measures in primary production and the role of best practices and good ag and livestock practices. That's something that all of us in our countries are working on really hard. We heard this from the previous speaker, from Raul. Basically, these good practices are sort of guidelines or directives or rules about what we should focus on to have food safety, to protect the health of the worker and the health of the field and the health of the environment, if you're talking about agriculture or livestock as well. You also have to think about animal welfare. And when you think about this entire food chain, which is getting longer and more complex, and we're getting further and further away from producers, from farmers where those products are made or grown, we have to understand as consumers on our side that whoever is handling the production of that food is doing the right thing and can offer me that guarantee. So that's where we have third-party certifications. And in Ecuador, our Minister of Agriculture has a policy and our quality agency has a policy where we've worked on a scheme for certification for certain ag and livestock practices. We've got a copyrighted certificate that's already starting to appear on packaging, on our labels in the supermarkets, and we are certifying products with this label, BPA. It's a public certification. It was launched on World Food Safety Day back in 2019, the first World Food Safety Day. And we've now got scheme equivalences. We are the first country in the world to achieve equivalences with a public certification for best practices in the area of fruits and vegetables, V5.2. And we've also set up additional volunteer modules around deforestation, around other areas, and with other biosafety measures to prevent deforestation in each organization relevant to that. And in the future, we're going to be doing more of that. We've also got a COVID-19 focus, and COVID-19 doesn't necessarily have a direct tie to food safety, but we've seen that a lot of countries like China especially has placed restrictions on certain trade for products because they're requiring biosafety for workers and handling food, especially when it's primary production products before it reaches that country. So we have an additional module to help certify. And we've also standardized our scheme equivalent certifications for organic products. We're seeing the Flor Ecuador certificate is another certification that we've got. And we're protecting national health, we're protecting the consumers in the target market, and we're supporting, as we said, food safety. I'm sure that you've seen these little dolls, these little cartoon characters on all of my slides. They're here on this slide. We're working on our final slide here, we're working with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Agriculture and Ag and Livestock. And we have created these cute little dolls, these cartoon characters that we call them. And we've got like a butcher, we've got a woman, a female farmer, we've got a child, we've got a housewife, and we've got a field worker. And these characters teach us and help us teach children about good practices in managing and handling food safety and how important it is for future generations to take on that burden that is coming from foodborne illnesses. And we've got publicly certified efforts, and we've got the official inspection for butchery products for agroquality. We've got organic certifications, and this is helping us increase traceability for food thanks to these products. Thank you so much to everybody. I hope I've stayed within time, and I'm sorry if I went a couple of minutes over. We are here if you have any questions from Ecuador. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rommel. Thank you. Let's go on to the presentation by Lorena Delgado from Chile. Hi, good morning. Can you hear me okay? Well, thank you for the invitation from Ecuador to present our Chilean experience in terms of management of contaminants. Let me share my screen. Can you see my screen now?
Correcto. Adelante.
Yes, please, go ahead. I will try to use a timer here. I'm Lorena Delgado. I'm the National Coordinator of the Subcommittee of Food Contaminants in the Codex Alimentarius here in Chile. I'm in the Public Health Institute. I have the honor of presenting our experience on contaminants in food. This is the breakdown, national situation on food safety control in Chile, and how the Codex Alimentarius is managed. First, my country, Chile, is in the south of the world, right at the end of South America, 19 million people. And as you can see, on the one hand, we have the Andes, and on the other side, we have a very long coastline, which is the privilege to produce lots of food, and thus we try to be a food production power. Many of our Chilean products account for a big size in terms of export, salmon, or some mussels, for instance, for our country is important, and why we thank the opportunity to be part today. The national situation on food safety control, we have an intersectoral approach. Food are managed through different ministries for export food. Those are under the Ministry of Agriculture through the Plant and Animal Service, plus the Chilean Agency for Food Safety that will do the coordination among committees. And this is the point of contact for Codex. For sea products, this is all coordinated by the Ministry of Economics through National Fishing Agency. And for the domestic consumption, it's the Ministry of Health through the regional offices and the Public Health Institute. And there is a committee that will review and update the food guidelines. And we have the National Commission of Codex Alimentarius. For domestic consumption, as you can see there, the Ministry of Health is the regulator, acts as a regulator who's responsible for the food regulations, updates. The regional offices are the executive agency. They are responsible as a health authority to control the food consumed in Chile. And the Public Health Institute is the national reference laboratory, is the technical arm, technical branch of the Ministry of Health for food regulations, even though the Ministry of Health has the power to change that. There is always there are always several public and private agencies involved, so as to continue with this intersectoral work approach. For the Ministry of Health, the food regulation, it's always under review. It's updated according to the Codex Alimentarius. According to the public policies of healthcare, we have the Department of Food, Zoonosis, and Vectors, who are responsible for the control and hygiene of food in order to monitor and control what we consume in Chile through different programs considering biological and chemical risks. And as you can see, we have residues of veterinary medicines, surveillance of mycotoxins, considering all the mycotoxins are under regulation internationally as a total aflatoxins, M1 aflatoxins, fumonicidins, dioxybalinol, and patulines. And for metals, we consider arsenic, mercury, cadmium, and lead. For marine toxins, we have an independent program where we control and surveillance of the coastline with which is not affected by the marine toxins. Now, in those regions that are affected, they have a constant monitoring and control of everything that is fished. We also have a surveillance program for dioxins, and with the biological, such as Campylobacter, Salmonella, and Brevio cholerae. This is a combination of work, the regional offices, the Public Health Institute, and also private institutes, private laboratories certified by the Ministry of Health. Chile, as you can see, is a very long country, so it's divided into several zones, 17 regions, and each region has a regional laboratory, and in some cases more than one because of the geography. There are more than one laboratory, what we call the satellite laboratories, especially in southern Chile, in the islands. They all have basic capabilities for meeting the enforcing the regulations responsible for sampling and supervised by the Institute of Public Health. What we provide supervision, technology transfer, and they're always open for training. That's part of my job, actually. We're always helping regional laboratories in whatever they need. Most of the samples are finished product, has to do with the direct sales to consumers. As a general inspection of the food, so as to check for permitted allowed substances and in an authorized amount for consumption. Let me share with you what we do about Codex Alimentarius in Chile. Chile is a member of the Codex Alimentarius Commission since 1969. In 1997, an advising committee called the National Committee of Codex Alimentarius was established, or CNC, controlled by the Ministry of Health. And today, those. Now we have a Chilean agency for food quality. We have we have several ministries. As I said, we manage this with an intersectoral approach. We do the research, proposals, analysis, and everything dealing with the food. The official members of the CNC are the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Economics, Development, Tourism, Agriculture, Health, Care, as well as representatives from the food industry, trade, consumers, and the academia. They all have the right to vote and the right to speak in this committee. And the coordinators of the various committees throughout the country. As you can see, the CNC replicates the structure of the international organization, determining the operation of the subcommittees, which are important for the country. For contaminants, the coordination is through the Ministry of Health, and and the coordinator is the Institute of Public Health, in this case, myself. The roles of the subcommittee is to analyze all the documents issued for each committee and collect all the concerns from the various sectors so as to build a country position that will represent all national domestic industry, considering the importance of making sure that food safety and fair trade. Also, our responsibility is to distribute the information. Academia, for instance, who may use this information and to make available to the various ministries the technology support to assess the relevance for the adoption or repeal of the codex and regulations. Another function of the subcommittees are to participate in the working teams and so as to build a country position, meetings, proposals on the various deliverables and information, and to represent the CNC and to propose the participation of the different members in international meetings and any other proposal that should be addressed by the codex. Who are in the subcommittees? We try and we to replicate in this intersectoral approach. So we need membership from the private and the public sector, the industry, the academia. So, well, I forgot to mention this for the contaminants. The committee is also responsible for the delivery of data, which is an important part, important role to provide information to the GEMS food platform. That's why we have all the working groups involved. That's a snapshot. That's our committee. It's more people, but as you all know, we're all working from home, and it has been a good thing. Some people involved are from different regions, so they had to travel. But now we do this in a much more fluent way. And that's the presentation I had for you. Thank you very much for your time, and of course, ready to take your questions. Thank you, Lorena. So in closing this stage, we will listen to Mexico. Please go ahead. Thank you, Asad Hanady. I believe that's my screen. Well, thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers for the kind invitation. I'm a consultant in epidemiology, risk analysis, and food safety, and I will be presenting the sampling protocol from the epidemiological and statistical standpoint for the detection of aflatoxins in corn, which is the result of a consulting work for IICA. Let's begin with a background on aflatoxins. These are toxic substances produced by some fungi which are present in the environment all over the world. These fungi may contaminate a series of crops, and they account for a severe danger for public health, either directly or through toxins. The drought, moisture, insect-induced damage, poor storage may also contribute or increase frequency in the development and growth of fungi, even in warmer regions where the problem is also significant. There's a wide variety of aflatoxins, but from the point of view of public health, the main ones are B1, B2, G1, and G2. All these aflatoxins are carcinogenic, mutagenic, and teratogenic, but I believe that B1 is considered probably the most toxic and being classified as cancerogenic for human beings. It is important to analyze that from the preventive standpoint, aflatoxins may be controlled before harvest, but also after harvest if the necessary practices were unsuccessfully applied. This study is based on information requested from countries in the OIRSA region, where we had Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Nicaragua, Panama, and Dominican Republic. The information supplied by these countries were national production and imports of corn, applicable legislation on the diagnostic of fungi and aflatoxins, sampling schemes, capacity and infrastructure in terms of staff and diagnostics laboratories, contamination risk reduction systems, best agricultural practices, other sanitary and phytosanitary requirements for imports, and the main risks of corn contamination, activities on inspection and surveillance, and whether they have current sampling programs and what findings have been. The type and number of annual samples which are processed, the type of laboratory diagnostics and techniques used, and what is the total annual number of positive samples for aflatoxin in corn. And of course, the last point, the type of statistic analysis used for this sampling. So the result of this monitoring overall, we can say that in the region, imports of corn basically come from two countries, the United States and Brazil. In maybe from from other countries in a smaller amount, but really not that significant. 33% of the countries have some type of specific regulation for aflatoxin samples in corn. 44% has some types of regulatory scheme focused on the sampling of aflatoxin for both domestic and imported corn. 56% has some type of diagnostic infrastructure and capacity and some type of risk reduction system for contamination in their crops. But no country in the region has some procedure for the design of statistical, both probabilistic and non-probabilistic sampling for, but probabilistic specifically, for epidemiological surveillance for corn aflatoxin, with the approach that in view that these may be a problem for human health. So how do we develop the sampling? First, we have to understand that the sign of statistical sampling applied for aflatoxin in corn is subject to the goal. That is, we can focus the design on epidemiological surveillance based on risks, or for the issuing of sanitary certificates for export or import purposes, or in the worst case, the research on foodborne disease outbreaks, which are subject to contamination, in this case of by aflatoxin. It is very important for us to consider that both the number and the type of sample in order to carry out these type of biological and statistical analysis is important for the sampling procedure is subject to this variation according to our goal. That is, what do we want and what are we going to do as far as the type of monitoring we have to apply.
Now, in the case of maize sampling, we need to make sure that we have enough samples that it is technically and scientifically statistically significant based on the health risk that it could entail for public health or animal health. And that's why it's so important that the design has to be statistically robust and based on technical and scientific criteria when we're thinking about how many samples we need. What can happen is that if you don't have enough samples, you might not detect aflatoxins. So that's why we see that even if we don't find aflatoxins in a sample, it does not guarantee the absence of that fungal toxin in the batch or the batches being examined. It's also important to think that batches of maize, when you're thinking about primary production or post-harvest, it's not always easy to get a sample that is representative and above all random, which is what will make it possible to implement the results for our overall population. So what we're trying to diagnose is something that would be applicable or would be happening throughout the entire system. So our goal is to demonstrate the absence of contamination. If we're monitoring maize for aflatoxins, then we have to select maize batches that would have a higher probability of finding the mycotoxin. So we need to make sure that we're doing risk-based statistical analysis. And we also have to think about post-harvest and primary production and imported maize depending on the amount or the risk identified to set the criteria. And we're also seeing that there could be higher risks in certain cases based on prior knowledge. Another thing that's important in statistical sampling determination is that we need to use both sensitivity and specificity of the diagnostic test being used in order to analyze the samples that we get. And doing so will enable us to extrapolate all of the results we get to the entire universe of the population. So that means we need the samples to be truly representative and applied to our entire population. If we think about sensitivity of the diagnostic test, it's really important in order to demonstrate the absence of contamination. And that's also important when we're trying to specify a specific batch or we want to do import or export. So based on the information that we get from countries, we've been able to figure out that the incidence or expected frequency in both nationally grown and imported maize is predicated on information that we've received in studies from phytosanitary authorities from countries throughout the region. That's how we were able to put together this table. And here we can see the likelihood. In the first column, you can see the likelihood parameters, which are for detecting some type of contamination of aflatoxins in maize. Second is contamination within permissible levels, within acceptable thresholds, or in the third case, contamination that exceeds the acceptable threshold. We can see values. We've got a minimum value of maximum value, oscillating, and the most likely value. And the highest of the most likely value is 39%, which would be that some type of contamination with aflatoxin, 30% probability within permissible levels, and 9% probability that it would exceed the permissible levels, with a range of 20 to 93% for some type of contamination with aflatoxin, which is quite high. And the percentages for acceptable levels is a minimum to max of 16 to 83%, and with contamination exceeding the levels between 0 and 11%. And these values were then subject to probabilistic analysis. We used PERT probability distributions, and we have neighboring values that help us figure out what other parameters can help us design the sampling methodology. As you can see on the orange table, we've got the most likely occurrence values based on the previous information, and we figured out that the likelihood of the maize produced both nationally or imported maize, the probability that it had some type of aflatoxin contamination, the most likely percentage is 44.83 with a standard deviation of 13.07. The likelihood of contamination below acceptable levels is 36.5% with a standard deviation of 11.67%, and contamination above acceptable levels, 7.83% with a standard deviation of 1.88%. And that helped us design statistical sampling that would be truly representative. We know that from a statistical standpoint, there are two types of sampling that we can use for food safety. We can use probabilistic sampling, and we can use non-probabilistic sampling. So in probabilistic sampling, the first case is random. The non-probabilistic sampling is not random. So what we're trying to do is find a process that identifies hazards that could be biological or chemical above all that may have an impact on public health. So we need to apply probabilistic sampling because we want certainty that whatever we're finding is something that we can extrapolate to our universe, to our entire population, our entire production, or everything that's being imported. So that means that this type of probabilistic sampling is what we use for scientific research, and especially when we're talking about detecting hazards that could be biological or chemical. Non-probabilistic sampling, by contrast, is probably the more common type of sampling that takes place, and it could be subject to influences from people in designing or in obtaining samples because it's done for other reasons, not for probabilistic reasons. It's non-random. So that means that in many cases, that type of sampling is just for convenience purposes. And from the standpoint of science and technology, it cannot be extrapolated to the entire universe. So the mathematical variables that we used in developing our sample, we have expected prevalence or incidence of 0.44. We saw the previous values already. We have a sensitivity for the diagnostic technique and a specificity of 0.97 and 0.99. And we've got desired accuracy of 0.13, level of reliability 0.95, which means we need a minimum sample size for what we're going to be doing of 61 sampling units. Now, it's very important to note that these sampling units have to be very well determined because we think that mycotoxins are invisible and they're insipid. And the only way to determine if the grains or the food could contain them is by analyzing them. So generally speaking, the sampling we do can be very complicated. It contains a lot of different variables, and it could affect each different sample. They could vary by region, by country, or even by food type. So generally speaking, we're obtaining for each sampling unit a primary sample, which is going to comprise our compound sample. And the compound sample corresponds to the entire sampling unit. So that means each sample can in turn be composed of several primary samples. And then when it gets to the lab, that compound sample is going to be turned into an analytical sample, which is what the technicians use for the diagnosis and analysis. You can see on the right-hand side what the sampling units that we generally use are. You could have a batch, a lot, a wagon, a truck, a warehouse, a plot of land, among other sampling units. And every country, every ag and livestock service can figure out its own sampling unit. And I've also put together a table that could be facilitating this work. This table can help you figure out how many samples you need to take for imported maize and for domestic maize. So on the first line, you can see if you've got domestic production of 10% and imported 90%, then your sampling size is going to be relative to that. So 7 for domestic samples and 55 for imported samples. If you look at the bottom of the table, by contrast, let's say you've got a country that's producing 0% or importing 0% and fully doing national production, then you've got 61 samples that have to be domestic. And this is a little bit general, but it is also going to depend on the economy and the infrastructure when you're figuring out how you're going to do the monitoring. You might do it annually at least, or a semester, or quarterly, or monthly. When we think about preventive measures and mitigation measures, the idea is to eliminate sources of contamination. That's not always easy to do. We also want to foster best agriculture and storage practices. We want to make sure we have enough resources to conduct the tests and the diagnoses in a timely fashion. Strict compliance with food safety standards, which is also something that can be difficult to see or might go unnoticed. We need to provide information, education for consumers and small-scale subsistence farmers who are also important to the sampling complex for aflatoxins in maize. We also want to strengthen contamination risk reduction systems and best agriculture practices during primary production, harvest, and post-harvest for maize and maize byproducts, which is something that we need to monitor when you're thinking about consumption of the final product. And of course, we have to design statistical samples that are both probabilistic and representative for active epidemiological surveillance programs that are risk-based. That's as far as I will take it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you so much. Before we go to our Q&A, I want to thank the FAO and the Pan American Health Organization and IICA and OIRSA and CCLAC who have made it possible to hold this webinar. I also want to thank all of the participating countries, as well as Argentina, Honduras, Ecuador, Peru, Colombia, Panama, Bolivia, the Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Venezuela, Brazil, and Paraguay for being here. Thank you so much to everyone. We're now going to kick off our Q&A. We've got some questions set and one question set. Well, the first question. What is the biggest problem facing us in order to get safe food? Rommel, go ahead. Thank you, Jose. Thank you to whoever sent in that question. It's a very important question. This is what makes our heads spin, all of us. Personally, I think we need to do things responsibly with accountability and adherence to best practices that we've heard about this morning. As long as we respect the label on food or an input for agriculture, whether it's an anti-pest or an agricultural item or whatever it is, then we are going to be able to ensure that the crop is safe and that that technology tool is used in the right dose for the right pest for the right crop. Or if it's injectable, like an antibiotic, we have to think about the lapse time. How long does it stay before the product can be disposed of, or we might think about meat or muscle, what happens to it and how long the antibiotic stays in it before it becomes food. The idea is to minimize risk of contaminating food, as we spoke about, and also primary production. I think that could be one of the big problems. I think the biggest issue is to be more orderly, more respectful toward the technology tools that we're using, whether they're chemical or biological, because there's risks everywhere you look. Thank you so much, Rommel. For Raul, your question is, where can you get the regional document on best agricultural practices, those BPAs you showed us? Thank you so much for the question. The document is going to be available starting next Monday. We are going to be posting it digitally, and we're also going to print out quite a few copies of this booklet, but primarily it will be available digitally starting next Monday on the OIRSA website. Thank you so much. Marcos, your question is, what experience have you had with falsification, adulteration, and relabeling of products in ag and livestock, and how can we control that? That's a very good question. I don't want to be overly alarming. I think that information might come from the veterinary service, or NASA for us, rather than from me. But what I can say in response to the question is that public policy is aiming to strengthen the veterinary service through a public-private partnership that has been recognized by the OEA as an example of progressive public administration, in the sense that the public sector is playing its arbiter and supervisory role, but is using the private sector as an executive arm on one side and allocating resources to enforcing public policy. This system has led to success. As we saw in the presentation, we might be a small country, but for 20 years we've been strong in this. And I'm sure there have been cases of what you're talking about, but I would say that if we work well and if we think about the work the veterinary service has done, it has made it possible for those cases to be detected and corrected. And the authorities and the audits can figure them out in each country, and they should all be subjected to that audit function to ensure food safety in all of the markets where we're working. Thank you so much, Marcos. We've got another question for Lorena. What is the responsibility of producers or farmers in Chile when it comes to products that are being exported? Does the exporter pay for the analyses and costs of the analysis, or is it covered by a national entity? Yes, the producer or the farmer has to cover the costs of the analyses. What we do is we have the lab managing the analysis, a recognized lab. That's when it's domestic, but I think your question was about international, about exports, right? I'm going to repeat the question. It says, what is the responsibility of the producer or farmer in Chile when it comes to products that are being exported? So when it is exported, you do have the producer paying for the entire analysis. That is the requirement. And then, of course, the country that receives the food might need the analyses to be done by a lab that is recognized by the country receiving the food. Okay, thank you, Lorena. And we are now going to have a question for Assad. What are the main risks for contamination facing consumers in our region?
Thank you. That's a good question, and it's a challenge. Even though risk factors primary risk factors are as a result of initial contamination, timely detection, and treatment. But if this challenging food chain grows up to end consumption by consumers, of course, that's subject to different risk factors. Aflatoxins are, once present in food, are difficult to eliminate, difficult to destroy. So yes, we have to be based on initial best practices in agriculture, harvesting, post-harvesting, but also in the preparation of a finished food, so that we have to identify is the probability of contamination from origin, and then and the consumption by end consumer. Risk factors depends on whether it's a domestic production, import, where it comes from, the transportation means, how do we store it, how do we process, everything we did for import or for export based on storage. And then processing. Each one of these risk factors will determine this potential hazard of being affected. That will depend on several factors related to feeding habits by country, by region, by the type of food. And for the last question for us, knowing that the chemical hazards have been overlooked for several times and they have a long-term effect, what strategies do you think may be applied to control them? Definitely, I agree. Many of the risks identified in food safety are based mostly on biological hazards, viruses, bacteria, fungi, rickettsias, but vibrions. But chemical hazards are sort of on a second level. That's why, because the impact, the acute impact, is less visible in the short term, in a chronicle manner. So there's little research really that identify the impact of toxic waste, pesticides, herbicides, aflatoxins. There is no follow-up study on the impact on public health. So I believe the chemical hazards have to be assessed and considered at the same level with the same importance of biological hazards, even though the biggest problem is that, unlike biological problems, which could be an acute or subacute outbreak, but chemical hazards have a chronicle manifestation, so it will be mid or long term. And when we want to identify sources of origin, sometimes it's no longer easy because of the time. But chemical hazards have to be considered at the same level as biological, especially with so much environmental pollution. One last question for Rommel. What concept? What do you think of the use of immunoemasculation in pork? Thank you. That's really relevant. Everything depends on the tools. We have the risk of the use of certain tools may cause part of the input will go to the food. I believe there are no technology tools which are bad per se or good per se. The good use or bad use will make these tools to be positive or not for food safety. Thank you. Okay, I would like to thank our panel members and all of our attendees joining us today. Remember, we will continue this webinar on next Thursday. So once again, thank you and have a good day, everyone. See you there.